Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're not too sleepy. If you do, please jiggle your legs, move around a little bit, and then get settled right back in. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. And I have here with me the esteemed Ramon Garcia, who's been an extraordinary investment story in the gaming scene here in Manila. I remember when DFNN first started out, and ever since then, over the last 10 years, he's really come a long distance. And on the far left is David Carrurthers. I don't think I'll bother going through David's background. Just Google David Carrurthers, and his background speaks for himself. He's a legend in the online gaming industry. So without further ado, we're going to jump straight in, as we are pretty time limited, and I don't see the clock here, Luis. Hope to see a clock so we can keep time. So right here behind me, we're talking about the Philippines and its investability on this panel. So right here behind us is a chart on the foreign direct investment by countries in Southeast Asia for 2022. Now there are some figures for 2023, and Ramon can address that, but basically, if we looked at that, the Philippines ranked 9 out of 13 in 2022, only ahead of countries like Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, but behind all the other more established Southeast Asian economies. So, Ramon, if I can direct this first question to you, what does this portend for the Philippines economy and its investability?
Well, I never judge going forward investments on historical data. So you'll have to take into account that 2022 was an election year where we had a transition in government. We were just coming from the COVID issues that had affected all of us. Moreover, if you look at more recent numbers, for 2023, the Philippines is only third behind Indonesia. So it's, Indonesia leading, and I believe next to that is Singapore and the Philippines. So everybody else has dropped lower, we've increased. Moreover, if you look at the change in administration, it had one of the largest mandates in Philippine election history, which gave a resounding sense of confidence of being one of the most stable democratic institutions or countries currently, as I had stated before. This president has gone abroad, perhaps to the consternation of a few, selling the Philippines, which has actually resulted in the Philippines having the best GDP growth in the region, and actually one of the best in the world for the size of our country. So that shows you that the lagging historical data is not what you should judge going forward. So right now, if I look at the growth of Indonesia, it was because at that time their Prime Minister Widodo did the same thing President Marcos did, was reach out to the community and tell them, the global community, tell them that the world is open for business. And the one that you should look out for is, I think we're coming closer to a free trade agreement between the EU and the Philippines, which will have a large impact.
Okay, fantastic. What about you, David? I mean, you will have an interesting perspective because you're an outsider, you've been a well-established person of interest in the gaming industry, and you spend about 20% of your time here. Why would you do that? Why do you come to spend your time here in the Philippines?
Well, I came to the Philippines 20 years ago, and I recall meeting Ramon. I also recall RCBC Tower 2 is still being built. And look where you are now. The amount of growth, the amount of energy, the amount of people that have opened businesses here and been successful, and the professionalism of organizations such as PACOR, where in the last 24 months are transforming an environment that outside was seen as potentially hostile, was seen as expensive, is now seen as opportunistic. The one thing that I recognize about the Philippines that's different to other Asian jurisdictions, it's the creativity and the ability of its nationals. you have an amazing populace that can work in our industry and produce in our industry and be creative in our industry. And our industry needs creativity.
We discussed that earlier, and the Philippines, absolutely right. You're absolutely right. You know, it has tremendous resources in this country, particularly its human resources. But at the same time, I think Philippines suffer from a little bit of discontinuity in terms of the bureaucracy that foreigners usually have to navigate before they can invest here. And once they plant their feet here, they have to go through more bureaucracy to maintain their presence. So how do you, as a foreigner, navigate this process?
I look at the UK Gambling Commission and I scream because it's just as complicated as PACOR. It's just as difficult to get an employment license to work in the United Kingdom. Actually, it's not as difficult. It's easier to get it here than it is in the UK. The Philippines should not be shy about being progressive, and they're not shy about being progressive. And they should not be embarrassed about a minutiae of bureaucracy. It's necessary. It's just like KYC is necessary if you're a banker. KYC is necessary if you're an investor. KYC is necessary if you're an operator. Some people call it bureaucracy, but in the modern world it is necessary. What you do is streamline it as much as you can and make people understand it as best you can. And then people will embrace it and move on.
All right, what about you, Ramon? I mean, do you think that the foreigners get it tougher than you as a local in trying to get investment started, business going?
I don't think so. You know, these are general statements. I think the foreigners who are used to a rules-based environment will accept it. There are certain foreigners that always think that perhaps they look at the Philippines in a different way and would like to shortcut it. I don't advise it. If you want to do business here in the long term, try to stay on the straight and narrow. And if there's green shoots that we can show you as an example, today the Philippines has the fastest internet in terms of deployment. We were able to change our law to allow the entry of Starlink. And now if you go to any part of the seas within our territorial waters, you go to the land, if you're an online gaming company, there's no problem for online in the Philippines anymore because we are one of the fastest growing markets for Starlink internet because every access is now available. So these are some of the regulatory green shoots that should tell foreigners the Philippines is really open for business. I understand there are a few more bills that will be signed into law that will accelerate this, including the rapid creation of our own government investment fund called Maharlika. And within, I guess, the larger IT, BPO, DICT environment, one good thing the gaming industry does, and which was lacking in the Philippines, but as I see PAGCOR, this current administration, highly engaged on this stage talking about AI, it should be an area that you should look at because any country with a regulated gaming environment has software developers that services that. The Philippines historically has gotten it from partners overseas. But with this type of environment, the lowering of taxes, which I said was on my wish list, and 1 year after it's changed, they're reactive, positively reactive. You might want to look at either doing a joint venture or partnering with the local companies that will eventually grow their capabilities in this industry as well.
You mentioned taxation. How has that changed for the better?
I think there's a cognizance that if they do not change the regulatory environment, the illegals will basically come in. We ourselves are aware that there's an illegal operation that currently has about $500 million in a bank. The anti-money laundering group is figuring out a way to go after them. But with PAGCOR lowering the hurdle rate and being responsive to benchmarking themselves against other regulated jurisdictions, it's a very positive sign. The higher you make it, the more the illegals can weigh and justify the friction cost and just stay outside of the regulatory purview. And when you have the internet, you have VPN, I'm sure quietly you guys all understand what I'm saying.
Well, we can't seem to talk about the investability or the growth, economic growth of the Philippines without touching on gaming. Gaming seems to dominate. I mean, is it because we're a gaming conference here? Or, if I could ask the question, how much does gaming, both land-based and online, actually contribute to the economy?
It's actually the third largest contributor to government coffers and national treasury after taxes and customs. So it's a very significant one. And if I look at the press releases of the state gaming firm PAGCOR, they should have already turned over and increased and surpassed the GGR of Singapore. And the fact that many of the larger gaming companies, medium scale, have made Manila and some of them now Cebu, their regional headquarters for gaming, bodes well for the confidence in the Philippines.
What about you, David? I mean, what would you like to see, or what have you seen in the recent changes with PAGCOR and the gaming regulations, particularly in relation to online, and what do you think could be done better?
Well, the thing I see and the thing I've saw emerge in the last 18 months is more stability. And we feel more welcome here now. 2 years, 3 years ago, the start of COVID, big question mark as to whether gaming operators were going to be welcome in the Philippines. We now feel welcome in the Philippines, and we now see people recognizing the injection of capital that we put into the general economy. Not just what we pay in PAGCOR taxes, not just what we pay salaries to thousands, to hundreds of thousands of people, but what these people do to the local economy in paying rent, buying cars, going to the cinema, and living their life. That is a really significant change, and that is something that will continue as this industry continues to grow. I see no slowdown in growth. All I see is another resort going to be built. I see things developing in a different region like Clark, and Ramon mentioned Cebu as a center of excellence. I mean, 20 years ago, Cebu was a pioneer region for development of product, and it's continuing, and everything will continue.
All right, great, thanks, David. So now, in terms of, we saw recently in the news that in Singapore, the Chinese embassy warned their citizens not to gamble overseas. And this is not a new development because several years back, even before COVID, there was a warning issued in mainland China for their citizens, to their citizens, to let them know that it is illegal to gamble anywhere outside their shores, outside of the mainland. And at that time, we understood mainland to refer to the mainland Chinese, not covering Macau, Taiwan, or Hong Kong. Do you think this announcement will change, A, the land-based casinos here in the Philippines, and B, more importantly, the online industry? And by that, I think recently there was another detention of some 30, 40 people, Chinese nationals who were then sent back to China for being involved in the online industry. So do you see any changes or any impact from such an announcement going forward on land-based and online? Ramon?
You know, like you said, Ben, you've been probably my mentor in the industry for quite a number of years now. They've been saying that for a while. I think beyond the politics of it, I think you'll just have to look internally at what's happening to China. I think that has more impact on them warning their citizens. You've got current issues on Shanghai where certain industries have started to leave. You're talking about a global tariff where they're re-looking at supply chains in China. You're looking at some of the largest real estate companies going bust in China. So I think that worries me more if you're going to plan on the Chinese market, because ultimately every household has a limited number of disposable income, right? And that is where normally you'll be getting your revenue from. If that's going to be affecting it, plus the fact that as of early this year or late last year, the Chinese population is now in a reverse growth cycle where their population is declining, I really wouldn't stake all my business on something that fundamentally itself has issues in terms of its growth prospects. Now, if you look at gaming on a much wider scale in terms of regulated and legal, beyond providing platforms, start looking at services, every US state has therefore now increased its legalized gaming. And those same guys will need probably the same services that American Express has, Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, British Airways. They'll probably need eventually an alternative and support team. So within the, I guess, vertical and horizontal of the gaming industry, it could be another opportunity. And if you look at South America, which is also going to start growing, and Africa, which some countries have also started to show positive growth with big populations, there's much more to the world than China. And Indonesia and the Philippines alone combined is a bigger population than all of the United States itself. So I think somehow start looking regionally and looking at other markets and just don't depend on China.
David?
The short answer is ditto. He's absolutely right. He's 100% right. China is China, but China has its own problems. And I can tell you that all the operators that I represent are looking at the global market opportunity. Nobody's looking at China as a market opportunity. Even if you're a retail casino here, your customers come from all over the globe. Philippines is an amazing destination. It attracts people from everywhere, not just mainland China.
If I may add to that, let me talk about rules and regulations. The Philippines is now going to open up very quickly. You'll see rules on allowing foreigners, their families to live in the Philippines, which we're working on very easily. So for those displaced people, which historically the Philippines has allowed people from Jews to Chinese to Vietnamese who've come here for a sanctuary and safe haven, we're now going to institutionalize that by rules. And soon, for those who want a special resident visa in the Philippines, I think will be the most cost-effective versus even Thailand on their golden visa or tourism visa, or Malaysia's second home visa. The Philippines is serious about bringing more people into its talent pool, having more people live here. And that being said, remember, between now and 2040, the Philippines is going to add 30 million people. And the average age will still be 34 and a half, which is your most productive. 30 million means we added another Malaysia, we added another Australia, we added another Canada, or from Europe, we added a Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and Norway in just that short time frame. And that's a very attractive market.
All right, what we're going to do is a break from the norm. So I'm going to see if there are any questions while we're still here before we progress to other issues. So are there any questions from the audience? Martin? Nothing? Anybody? There's one over there.
How you doing, gentlemen? Thanks for the chat. I was only talking to Carrurthers and the other gentleman there after. I'm quite interested to see or hear from your perspective what the investment flow is to companies based in Manila. So is there capital flowing into service providers, casinos, and various other operations in the region? And is it local investment or international investment that's looking to deploy that capital here?
It's actually a mix of both, and I'll be very honest with you. Coming from Tokyo, coming from Spain, I just recently found Manila very expensive. I mean, a meal here is really come up in price. That should tell you that the GDP, the real wealth of the country is growing and the interest is growing. We have a social media monitoring team looking at YouTube videos, blogs, and so forth. The amount of foreigners who are now blogging from the Philippines, coming from the Philippines. Like I said, we're soon going to give you a nomad visa. We're making it easier for you to please stay here legally and not illegally. And we welcome you. The Philippines is a melting pot. We've never had race issues. We're the only country in Southeast Asia that never had a Chinese race issue. So we welcome you. So I would, though, start looking at other places. I find Metro Manila expensive. Cebu, I got shocked at the per square meter. It's now matching Fort Bonifacio. But we have other areas of development. Nuvali, as my good friend here, David, who, this is a return for a meal. He's like a balikbayan returning to the country because he smiles like we smile. But Clark, I would say, if you want an eco, Palawan, and the fact that, like I said, with Starlink and soon OneWeb and all of that, you can operate from anywhere in the country. Another place I'd look at is Bataan, close by. A new bridge is going to be built. That 2.5 to 3 hour drive is going to be cut to 45 minutes. So if you're looking for efficiency in your organization, you don't necessarily need to only be in Metro Manila. Thank you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ramon. I mean, I've always found Manila quite expensive in relation to the average income. The F&B, particularly when you're out dining, is frightfully expensive, sometimes almost on par with Australia, which is recognized as an expensive place to dine.
I'll give you a specific metric that I'm saying it's really expensive. At the height of Japan's property boom, the highest price for a golf share was $2 million. The price today of a Manila golf share is approaching $4 million US dollars. Wak Wak is $2 million. And still there's no seller. So that means that there's a demand mismatch, but there's also wealth that's coming into the country. I just saw an offer today, Canlubang. Canlubang going down south, maybe it takes you 2 hours, is now approaching $200,000. So, you know, there's money looking to be deployed. I would say tap it, but look at other areas that perhaps you have yet to explore in the Philippines. We have 7,614 islands, so please choose one.
Can I just add one observation? I've been lucky enough to spend quite a bit of time in Brazil recently, and Manila is safe compared to some cities in Brazil. And Manila is safe compared to the capital of the United Kingdom, if you read the newspapers every day. That's something that's not perceived by everybody, but it's true.
Great. Any question before we continue? No? Fantastic. So, Ramon, you said that the gaming industry constitutes it's the third largest. I don't know what percentage of public revenue it constitutes, but it's the third largest.
I think 3.5% of GDP.
3.5% of GDP. So do you see this trend continuing? And B, in what form would it continue? Is it likely to come from the online sector, or is it going to come from the land-based primarily?
I think if you study the industry called the electronic gaming machine manufacturers, the Philippines itself is still a very high population to machine ratio, whether that be online or physical. You know, online will always have a certain aspect. Undoubtedly, it has the highest growth, especially the Philippines is what? In the top 3 or 4 of Facebook, Twitter, almost all social media platforms, right? If you look to Bitcoin and crypto trading, the Philippines is again one of the highest, right? We had a digital game, I don't want to mention it, it was 800 million from the Philippines alone. So that shows you there's a lot of hidden wealth. But that being said, the Philippines is also a destination from which you can grow. My personal feeling is that the rest of Southeast Asia, even North Asia, will eventually legalize and recognize the digital side or cede it to the illegals. But if you want to have a support service for those countries, I would think the Philippines probably gives you the best proposition to do that. It would be a center of excellence, I think, for you to grow. Whether you relocate staff here and ease of doing that or grow your base. We graduate about 80,000 engineers a year. So we do have the human capacity and technical skill set to support your operations.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but to get an online license or any gaming license, the company has to be 60% owned by a local?
That is currently on the negative list once you specifically say gaming. But you know, gaming has a gray area, right? If you're taking bets overseas, and I don't want to, this is a really active board. They're a very strict board, but they're a very responsive PAGCOR board, right? And they do. They're all, for the first time, I'm seeing them operate like a private sector. They're doing A and B testing to see what works and fine tune, like Director Gilbert said, which is great, right? Now, ultimately, I think PAGCOR will eventually realize 2 things. how do they help Filipino companies grow? And there's legislation to that effect, that if you partner with a Filipino company and you have partial Filipino shareholders, there's going to be certain incentives the Philippine government is now going to give you to grow faster or give you enablement. The second one is they're going to start looking that, yes, you have domestic growth, but you don't want to be a single asset revenue generator. What happens if you have a problem in your home market? What happens if there's a political rationale that perhaps the heart changes and you don't want so much gaming, like China saying it's illegal one day? There still is a way within that gray area, and I would prefer it's under PAGCOR, where you're doing these outsourced services from the Philippines for the gaming industry. And when you look at a country like Italy, which has a declining population, again, they will lower their costs. They love gaming. Same thing with Australia. Do it in the Philippines. It's probably better and more efficient.
So you're basically saying that one way to get around the 60% rule is to not label yourself as a gaming company, but as a solution provider or service provider in some form or another.
Yes, under our laws, tech companies are allowed to be 100% owned foreign companies.
David, do you see this as an obstacle to more foreign investment?
It's a practical approach. You fragment the business into its core disciplines. So one sector is gambling, other sector is support, other sector is creativity, development, etc.
But doesn't that lower the attraction of starting a company up in Philippines? Because sometimes being a gaming stock
no. What it
gives you a premium.
It's as simple as this. If it's raining, you put up an umbrella. You just work around the situation. There are more pluses than minuses here. And trust me, no matter which jurisdiction you go into, they have rain too. It's just the same as everywhere else. Sometimes it's used as a brush to paint a picture that's ugly, but it's not the real picture.
Would you like to very quickly give us a rundown of pros and cons?
Well, like I said earlier, it's a friendly country, it's a safe country, it has talent here, it has an abundance of talent here, it's in the center of an exciting region that love the industry that I've spent nearly 50 years in, so I love the place, I'm biased.
And the cons?
Pass.
I
could give you some cons, but I might be rude. I don't want to be rude to anybody, No, there are no real cons, to be honest. You just be creative in your solution. The secret is to actually abide by the rules. The misdemeanor is when you don't abide by the rules, you will get the consequences. Maybe not today, maybe not in 5 years, maybe not in 10 years, but you will get the consequences.
What about you, Ramon? Would you care to share some cons with us?
I guess it's more of a cultural thing. If you're coming from the West and expect Filipinos to be very in your face or accept verbal abuse, I think you have to learn the culture more. This country, you'll get more done with honey than that type of attitude, whether it's government, whether it's your employees and so forth. So that's something that you have to bring out, I guess, of your staff. That, David.
Actually, there's something that I learned before I got here, because I spent 6 years in Costa Rica, and I had to learn how to manage the Costa Rica employee. I had 2,500 employees in Costa Rica, and there is a great similarity between the disposition of a Costa Rican and a Filipino. One thing, you never tell a Filipino off in front of an audience, they'll never forgive you. But you can take them into private and have a conversation, and they will listen to you, and they will learn, and they will work hard to do better. Simple.
And the other con is PAGCOR has no police powers. So that's unfortunate. I've seen some of you are licensed operators here. Unfortunately, the illegals are taking the PAGCOR logo, they're taking your logo, they're putting up Facebook pages, stealing your intellectual property, and redirecting them to illegal sites. As good as PAGCOR is, as great as their management, unfortunately, we have to tweak our law, as Congressman Gus said. They have zero police powers. So even if us, who are regular, have been reporting it to PAGCOR and PAGCOR has to coordinate with the National Bureau of Investigation Cybercrime. They have to coordinate with the Philippine National Police. They have to coordinate with military intelligence. They have to coordinate with with the Department of Information and Communication Technology. They have to coordinate with NTC. That has a lot of leeway for sovereign and criminal organizations to take advantage of the fact that PAGCOR itself cannot move quickly to stop these leakages. That's a con.
That segues into the next issue, which is about enforcement, about the ability to bring real changes in. Now, the FATF placed the Philippines on the gray list several years back. I think it was 2017 or 11. And the first renewal, the first review was last month. Philippines remains on the gray list. Now, the FATF president cited two strategic deficiencies that the Philippines were not able to resolve. One was that to implement controls to mitigate anti-money laundering. And the first was linked to junket operators in casinos. The second reason was the lack of prosecutions and investigations into money laundering and terrorist financing. And for the life of me, I can't figure out what terrorist financing there will be, except for the possibility that money's come in and they don't know where it went. And the only case I can link to this second issue is the Bangladeshi bank scam, where to date they still haven't been able to resolve where most of that money went. So, being placed on a gray list and remaining on a gray list, do you think it would be, and I don't know when the next review is, do you think the Philippines would be able to get off that gray list?
I take these lists with a grain of salt. You know, sometimes the West wants to implement their judgment of you, and it's not necessarily right. I won't mention another country in the region that all of you like. It's very clean and green. It's had the same leader for quite some time. I love it, but you consider it a rule-based country, but it is also on the gray list. So, you know, I think the Philippines is doing the best it can. Technology will probably bridge that capability in terms of tracing the funds, should they be used for illegal activities. But just like the US SEC forcing the Philippines to say you cannot trade on your stock market as a broker if you are related by fourth degree of consanguinity to the broker, and that is a Western rule. Our stock market volume dropped by 50% because they found out we were all related. So they got rid of that law after 3 months. Volume went back up. So sometimes I'm a little bit wary of a list that was meant for other countries, not taking into account how your country actually operates. Same thing with Japan. Many family-owned corporations still there, including Toyota and Sony.
David, what about this FATF issue?
Well, I would only observe that Malta was on the grey list and it got off. Gibraltar was on the grey list and it got off. So maybe you should talk to both of them.
So why can't the Philippines get off the grey list?
Well, like I said, Gibraltar and Malta must have a secret that the Philippines don't have.
Yeah, they also have a much smaller population and less islands.
It's. I'm on the same page as you, Ramon. It's a bureaucracy. It's a convenient bureaucracy for much bigger countries than the Philippines.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is, I note that the President Marcos, issued edicts last year directing all government departments, including PAGCOR, to get their act together to have the country removed from the grey list. And this was last year in preparation for the review in February. But it doesn't seem to have worked this time. I'm sorry for asking the same question.
Work in progress, Ben. It'll get there.
Okay. All right. I'm going to open up the panel to the audience again for more questions. Please put your hand up. We can't really see because of the light shining in our eyes, but I'm sure the attendants will be able to. No. And, well, gentlemen, do you have any issues you would like to raise in closing this panel?
just want to thank you all. I just realized that almost all the major gaming shows from G2E to this one and all of that has relocated to the Philippines. I want to thank you all for your faith in our country, and look for the nuances that are not so apparent. I think you'll find a lot of gemstones here in the country. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ramon. David, any last words?
I just want to thank the Philippines for embracing me and allowing me to work here and live here.
Who's embracing
We welcome you, David.
Thank you very much.